Hey everyone, this is Sam with Bartos Builds, and this project did not go as planned, but still turned out way better than I ever could have imagined. Initially, I was attempting to make a 3 by 2 foot end grain cutting board that was supposed to be 2 inches thick. I've never made an end grain cutting board before, and math's never really been my strong suit. So when I was trying to figure out the amount of material I would need for the project, the math just was not mathing. I ended up ordering some wood from Woodworker Source, and as you can tell by the clip from earlier in the video, there were some serious cupping issues which caused me to lose a decent amount of material right off the bat. This project was made from black walnut and spalted maple. The first glue up consisted of 3 to 4 panels that were under 13 inches wide so they could still fit through the planer. I attached the pieces on a sled and sent them through the planer, taking off as little material as possible. After it came out of the planer, I removed the panel from the sled, scraped the glue off, and sent it back through the planer for a few more shallow passes. This next step I have to thank Ryan Hawkins for. The seams weren't as tight as I wanted them to be, and in one of his videos he mentions taking the 2 panels and running them through together on the joiner at the same time to create a tighter seam. This worked perfectly. I'll add a link to his video in the description below, and I highly recommend checking his stuff out. Everything he does comes out truly amazing. From there, it's on to glue up number 2 out of 3. After this glue up, I'm left to my own devices in terms of flattening it due to my 50-inch drum sander being out of commission. And if you think out of commission means I've never even been close to buying one, you'd be perfectly correct. Luckily, I had clamps that were just long enough to handle the glue up. Well, almost enough. Teamwork makes the dream work even when talking about clamps. After this glue up, I used the belt sander and then transitioned to an orbital sander. With this step, I couldn't just sand the seams because that would cause the panels to be uneven. So, front and back of 2 separate panels creates a lot of video footage that I will save you guys from watching. I then brought the panels over to the table saw and cut them down to roughly 2 1/4 inch thick strips. I ran into a little hiccup while doing this. As you can see, each cut I made, there was a part of the spalted maple that would snap in half. I tried everything to prevent this from continuing, but ultimately nothing worked. Spalting in wood is wood coloration caused by fungi. Spalting typically causes strength loss in the wood, which I think is what was happening to that specific spot. There was a little bit of video footage missing from after the table saw, because that was when I realized I didn't have even half of the amount of wood I would need to hit the dimensions I was going for. If anyone knows how to calculate how much wood is needed for an end grain cutting board, please help me and my Algebra 2 brain out with leaving the magic equation in the comments below. I oriented the pieces in a random pattern, and as you can see, I drew a line down the middle of the boards. This is another trick I learned from watching Ryan Hawkins. During the glue up, all you have to do is reference that straight line, and everything will line up exactly how you want it to. After everything was glued up, I applied a liberal amount of clamps and a few cauls on the sides, and I let that dry for about a week or so. That's my dog Denali, and she's my absolute best friend. Off camera, I built a router sled while the glue was drying. There are a ton of high quality videos out there that break down the process of making one. I watched Walker's, Woodworks, and DIY, and once again, I'll leave a link to the video in the description below. I don't have a workbench yet that has dog holes, but it's definitely on my list of projects I'd love to do for the shop. Due to this, I took a couple pieces of scrap wood and Brad nailed them into my existing work table. This did a really good job with keeping the piece in place while I routed out the top. There are a handful of ways you could go about keeping the piece in place, but the most important part during this process is that your 2 rails on the side are level to each other. You should also take off as little material as possible, even if it means doing this process 3 to 4 times. Also, the bit I used for this was the Surfacing and Flattening CNC router bit from Bits and Bits. I got the 1/4 bit shank, which worked perfectly for this application, but if I were to be doing a larger piece, I would definitely look into getting the 1/2 inch shank instead. If you've made it this far into the video and feel I have deserved it, please feel free to like and subscribe. I'm pretty good with answering any and all comments, but in this video in particular, I'll especially be looking out for the ones that help with my math equations. This is one of my favorite parts of the project because I can really take the time and pay special attention to the small details. I find with woodworking, and anything really, If you spend time and attention on the small things, then the big things will soon follow. For example, if you get up every morning and make your bed, then 2 minutes into the day, you've already accomplished a task. And since we're talking small details, I'll remember to try and focus the camera on the knotholes of the wood instead of my hand for next time. There were a lot of firsts for me during this build, and one of those was using my drum sander for the very first time. This was the outcome. Sometimes in the shop, you have to take a nice big inhale and exhale. After running it through the router sled one more time, I moved on to my sanding progression. I started at 80 grit and went all the way to 220. I added a round over to the side and caused some pretty bad burn marks. I hand sanded them off, but leave a comment if you know what I did wrong. Did I take too much material off at once? Is the router underpowered? I'm not sure. Let me know what you guys think. Like I said, this project had a lot of firsts for me, and one of those was making juice grooves. When I watched videos of other people making juice grooves, I saw guys on all fours on the table sweating profusely. In my head, I was like, come on, it can't be that serious. Well, let me tell you, it is that serious. This little detail can ruin the entire project in 1 second. To help make sure the router was on the right track, I used my pinky to run along the fence. If there's ever another time I do this, I would make sure to make smaller passes. I think I made slightly too big of passes, and it caused the router to at times want to jump away from me. This is a neat little trick if you have a carpenter pencil laying around. Back to focusing on the small details, and let me tell you, if my dentist ever has an itch or is scratching at my teeth for an extended amount of time, from now on I won't even question it. No questions asked. Do what you gotta do. After I picked at the knotholes for a large amount of time I will not disclose, I came back with some medium thick black CA glue to fill and stabilize the voids. I initially tried to do this with a quick 5-minute epoxy, but it ended up making a little bit too much of a mess. If you thought my other firsts in this video were bad, wait until you see this one. This was my first time using my router table. I got a new bit, had everything set up, and it had the audacity to come out looking like this. Definitely user error on my part. And I think what ended up happening was I moved the fence around too many times while making way too many cuts. I wanted a thicker size handle, and in doing that, I made everything choppy and uneven. After throwing my router table on the side of the road, I grabbed the Dremel tool and started hogging out as much material as fast as I could. After I salvaged it as best I could, I jumped right back into my sanding progression. Before moving forward with the 220 grit, I water popped the piece, which is imperative. If you're working on any wood that might come in contact with liquid, water popping is essential. What this does is raises the grain and makes the wood feel fuzzy. A little fun fact, my shop is actually at my grandma and great aunt's house. During the process, to pretty much every project I make, I run inside and show them things or tell them new things I've learned about wood or woodworking. Seeing their faces when they felt the raised wood grain will definitely be added to my core memories. They just could not believe it. They couldn't get over how it felt. In all seriousness, having my shop over there has been such a blessing. They not only get to see firsthand everything I'm working on, but it allows me to see them much more often. As time passes, I've learned to appreciate every moment more and more. It sounds cheesy, and this probably doesn't fit well with an end grain cutting board video, but I think it's important. It's easy to get lost in the everyday grind, and time starts passing faster than you ever could have imagined. Taking the time to appreciate the little things in life, in my opinion, is what makes the world keep spinning. Anyway, my diary will definitely be going back in the drawer for the next 2 minutes. I started measuring out where the feet will be on the bottom, and yes, before you ask, I did have to ask my girlfriend what half of 15 was. I then placed the board into a bin and added Clark's cutting board oil. What I found worked for me was saturating the entire board, taking it out, and letting it dry for a few minutes. I repeated this process until the board soaked as much of it up as it could. This board being end grain, this took quite a few dips in the oil pool. I then used some beeswax, rubbed off the excess, and added the feet to the bottom of the board. If you've made it through watching all the mistakes I made and the sappy talking, and you're still here with me at the end of the video, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate your time and watching me do something I love. I hope this inspires you to do something you're passionate about, and I hope you enjoy the final shots. I have to go get my router table from the side of the road. I'll see you on the next one.